My sister insisted I was having a girl, threw a pink princess shower, and redecorated my nursery pink. My son was born 3 weeks later. My sister Kara was supposed to be my best friend, and when I got pregnant, she immediately volunteered to throw my baby shower, saying it would be the event of the year. I was thrilled because Kara had this amazing party planning business where she did weddings and corporate events, so I knew she'd make it special. My husband Rob and I decided not to find out the gender, because we wanted to be surprised and told everyone we'd be happy either way. Kara kept pushing us to get the blood test done, saying she needed to know for planning purposes, but we stuck with our decision to wait. She seemed annoyed but said she'd make it work with neutral colors like yellow and green. About 2 months before my due date, Kara called me screaming with excitement, saying she'd had a psychic feeling about the baby. She claimed she'd dreamed 3 nights in a row that I was having a girl, and she was absolutely certain about it. I laughed and reminded her we wouldn't know until birth, but she insisted her intuition was never wrong. She'd correctly predicted our cousin's twins and our friend's baby gender, so people in our family actually took her seriously when she claimed to have these feelings. The shower invitations went out, and I was confused when they were completely pink with princesses and butterflies. Kara said since she knew it was a girl, why waste money on neutral decorations when we could have the perfect princess party? I tried arguing, but she'd already told 60 guests it was a girl shower and bought everything in pink. My mom backed her up, saying Kara's intuition had always been right before, and I should trust my sister. The actual shower was like being hit by a pink explosion. Everything from the tablecloths to the punch was pink. The cake was a 3-tier princess castle with "Welcome Baby Girl" written in glitter. The games were all about guessing the baby girl's name and designing her future wedding dress. The guests had all brought girl clothes, girl toys, and girl everything, because the invitation specifically said we were having a daughter. I sat there uncomfortable while everyone talked about how beautiful she'd be, and how she'd probably look just like me. Rob kept trying to remind people we didn't actually know the gender, but Kara would interrupt, saying her gift was never wrong, and she'd bet money on it being a girl. She actually did take bets from some relatives, collecting almost $500 from people who bet against her. The nursery situation got worse because Kara convinced my mom to surprise me by decorating while I was at the shower. They painted the walls ballet slipper pink with a princess mural, hung up a chandelier, and assembled white furniture with rose gold handles. When I came home to this transformed room, Kara said it was her gift to her future niece. I wanted to cry, but everyone was watching and saying how generous Kara was, so I had to pretend to be grateful. We received mountains of pink clothes, dolls, hair bows, and jewelry boxes for a baby girl who might not exist. The worst part was Kara kept doubling down on her prediction. She told everyone at our family reunion that she'd already bought a pageant dress for when my daughter turned 1. She signed me up for mommy and daughter ballet classes as a gift. She even convinced Rob's mother to embroider Grandma's Little Princess on a bunch of blankets. Anyone who expressed doubt was told they'd see when the baby arrived, and Kara was proven right once again. Then my son was born. The nurses announced it's a boy, and I saw Kara's face go white in the delivery room. She actually asked them to check again because that was impossible. While I was recovering, she tried to convince Rob that the ultrasound machine could be wrong and we should get a genetic test to be sure. She kept saying her intuition had never failed and there must be some mistake. Rob told her to get out of the room. The real problem hit when we brought our son home to a pink princess nursery with nothing useful for a boy. All the clothes were dresses and ruffles. Every toy was a doll or tea set. We didn't even have appropriate colored blankets because everything was aggressively feminine. Friends and family started calling, asking if Kara had been wrong and what we needed for the baby. The people who'd bet against her wanted their money, but Kara claimed the bet was invalid because I must have influenced the outcome somehow. That's when I decided Kara needed to understand what she'd cost us. First, I calculated everything. The nursery paint and mural, the furniture, the clothes, the toys, everything purchased based on her guaranteed prediction. It came to almost $4,000 of useless items. I sent her an itemized bill for replacing everything, including labor costs for repainting. She laughed and said I was being ridiculous over an honest mistake. So I started returning the favor. I picked up my phone and dialed Christian's number at the party planning office. He answered on the second ring with his usual professional greeting. I put on my sweetest voice and told him I had a referral for a massive wedding consultation, a couple with unlimited budget who specifically requested Kara because they'd heard amazing things about her work. Christian sounded thrilled and asked when the potential clients wanted to meet. I said Saturday morning at 10 and that they were very particular about punctuality, so Kara needed to clear her entire morning. He promised Kara would be there and asked for the address. I gave him the location of a children's birthday party venue about 2 hours away, claiming the clients wanted to meet there because they were considering it for their reception. Christian thanked me repeatedly and said this could be exactly what their business needed right now. Saturday morning arrived and I woke up early to feed Gwendolyn before loading him into the car. Rob asked if I was sure about this plan, and I reminded him that Kara had made decisions about my baby without asking permission, so now she could experience having her time wasted based on someone else's assumptions. The drive took 40 minutes and I arrived at the venue around 9:30. The parking lot was already filling up with minivans, and I could see blue and green balloons tied to the entrance. I parked where I had a clear view of the front door and settled in to wait with Gwendolyn sleeping peacefully in his car seat. At exactly 10 o'clock, Kara's silver sedan pulled into the lot. I watched her check her phone, grab her portfolio case, and walk confidently toward the entrance. She was wearing a professional dress and heels, clearly ready to impress these wealthy fake clients. The venue manager met her at the door, and I could see the confusion on both their faces through the window. Kara kept gesturing to her phone, and the manager kept shaking her head. That's when Kara turned and spotted my car in the parking lot. Her face went from confused to angry in about 2 seconds flat. I got out slowly, carefully lifting Gwendolyn's carrier, and walked toward the entrance. Kara met me halfway across the parking lot, her heels clicking hard against the pavement. She demanded to know what I was doing here, and I smiled and said I was attending a toddler's birthday party inside. Her eyes went to the blue and green decorations visible through the windows, and I watched understanding dawn on her face. I walked past her into the venue where about 15 parents were setting up for the party. I found a chair near the window and sat down with Gwendolyn, waving cheerfully at Kara through the glass. She stood frozen in the parking lot for a full minute before storming inside. The other parents looked up curiously as she approached me, her face red and her hands shaking. I kept my voice calm and explained that I wanted her to understand what it feels like when someone wastes your time and makes big decisions without asking. She started yelling about how I'd lied to Christian and made her drive 2 hours for nothing, how I was sabotaging her business and acting crazy. I pulled out my phone and held up the itemized bill showing $4,000 in expenses. I asked her loudly enough for the nearby parents to hear when she planned to pay for all the useless items she'd insisted on buying against my explicit wishes. Kara's voice got higher and she said I was making a scene and embarrassing her in front of strangers. I pointed out that she'd made a scene at my baby shower in front of 60 people, so this seemed fair. One of the mothers nearby looked up from arranging party favors and asked if Kara was the party planner who got the baby gender wrong. I watched Kara's face go from red to purple. The mother said she'd seen the story in her local mom group, and several other parents immediately pulled out their phones. Within seconds, 3 of them were clearly reading about Kara's pink princess disaster, while Kara stood there trying to defend herself. I stood up with Gwendolyn and walked toward the exit, telling Kara I'd see her when she was ready to take responsibility for her actions. The drive home felt longer than usual because Gwendolyn woke up hungry and I had to pull over twice to feed him. By the time I got back, I was exhausted from the confrontation and the lack of sleep that came with having a newborn. Rob was waiting and said Kara had already called him 3 times screaming about harassment and threatening to get a restraining order. He'd told her we'd stop when she paid the bill and apologized publicly, the same way she'd humiliated me publicly at that shower. I collapsed on the couch while Rob took Gwendolyn for a diaper change. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Verity asking if Kara had ever paid out the $500 in bet winnings. I sat up in bed and typed back suggesting that Verity and the other winners should probably ask Kara directly, maybe on social media where her business clients could see the question. Verity sent back a thumbs up, and I went to take care of Gwendolyn, who was crying for his morning feeding. 3 hours later, Rob showed me his phone where Kara's business page had 3 separate comments from people asking about their bet money. Christian called my phone directly within minutes, his voice tight with stress as he begged me to stop because they were losing client inquiries every day. I reminded him that Kara created this situation by taking bets she now refused to honor, and that she could make it all go away by paying what she owed. The rest of the week passed in a blur of diaper changes and feeding schedules. Every time I bought something for Gwendolyn, I photographed the receipt and added it to my spreadsheet. Gender-neutral onesies, boy-themed blankets, a blue changing pad, toys that weren't dolls or tea sets. Each purchase got documented with the date, store, and amount. By Friday, my spreadsheet showed $4,200, including the labor estimate for repainting the nursery that was still aggressively pink with its princess mural. I organized everything by category so Kara couldn't claim any of it was unnecessary. Every single item was something we actually needed that the shower gifts hadn't provided because she'd been so certain about having a girl. Joyce called on Saturday morning while I was trying to get Gwendolyn down for a nap. Her voice was already crying before I even said hello. She went on about how I was ruining Kara's business and reputation over an honest mistake, how families should forgive each other, how I was being cruel and vindictive. I waited until she stopped to catch her breath, and then asked her how it was honest when Kara was ignored our explicit wishes about not finding out the gender and wanting neutral colors. Joyce stammered that Kara's intuition had always been right before. I asked her how that made it okay to spend $4,000 of our money on useless items, to take bets for profit on my baby's gender, and to now refuse to make it right either financially or with a real apology for violating our boundaries. Joyce went quiet and then hung up without saying goodbye. I woke up Monday morning to my phone buzzing with Joyce's name on the screen again. I let it go to voicemail while I changed Gwendolyn's diaper and got him settled for his morning feeding. The voicemail notification popped up and I played it on speaker while Gwendolyn nursed. Joyce's voice came through shaky and desperate, saying Kara couldn't possibly pay $4,000 right now because business had been really slow the past few weeks. I felt my jaw clench as I listened to her make excuses about how hard things were for Kara right now with all the stress. When the message ended, I called Joyce back immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice hopeful like maybe I was calling to say I'd changed my mind. I told her that business was slow because Kara's judgment was now publicly questionable, and maybe she should have thought about that before gambling her reputation on being right about my baby's gender. Joyce went quiet for a few seconds, and then started crying again, saying I was being cruel. I hung up and blocked her number because I was done having the same conversation over and over. Rob's father Joseph showed up that afternoon with a check already written out for $5,000. He sat down in our living room, carefully avoiding the pink throw pillows that were still everywhere, and slid the check across the coffee table. He said he wanted to loan us the money to replace everything immediately, so Gwendolyn had what he needed, and we could pay him back whenever we were able. I looked at the check and felt tears starting because the offer was so generous and kind. But I pushed the check back toward him and explained that accepting it would let Kara off the hook completely. Joseph frowned and asked what I meant, so I told him this whole situation was about accountability, not just about the money itself. If Joseph paid for everything, Kara would never have to face what she'd done or take responsibility for ignoring our wishes and spending our money. Joseph nodded slowly and put the check back in his pocket, saying he understood, but the offer would stay open if we changed our minds. Layla showed up the next morning with 3 huge shopping bags full of actual useful baby boy clothes and supplies. She dumped them on my couch, laughing about how the pink princess stuff was still absolutely everywhere in my house. I started going through the bags and found practical onesies in blues and greens, soft cotton pajamas, burp cloths that weren't covered in tiaras, and a bouncer seat in gray fabric. Layla sat down and picked up one of the frilly pink dresses that was draped over the arm of the couch, holding it up with a disgusted look on her face. She said we should donate all of this useless stuff to charity in Kara's name and make sure the donation receipt got posted publicly on social media. I stopped folding the new clothes and stared at Layla because that idea was absolutely perfect. Layla grinned and said she knew that look, asking when we were going to start boxing everything up. I loved this idea so much that I spent the entire next day working on it while Gwendolyn napped. I pulled out every single pink item from the closet, the dresser drawers, the toy bins, and the decoration shelves. Dresses with ruffles and bows went into boxes. Dolls with sparkly tiaras went into boxes. Tea sets and jewelry boxes and hair accessories all went into boxes. The pink bedding came off the crib and got folded into a box. The princess wall decorations came down and got packed carefully. By the time I finished, I had 14 large boxes stacked in my garage, each one labeled with what was inside. I called the biggest donation center in town, and they were absolutely thrilled when I described what I had. The woman on the phone said they could send a truck the next day and asked if I wanted a detailed receipt for tax purposes. I said yes, definitely, and I wanted it to list Kara's party planning business as the donor, since she was the one who had purchased everything. The donation center posted photos on their social media page 2 days later, showing volunteers unloading all the boxes and displaying some of the nicest items. The caption thanked Kara's business by name for the incredibly generous donation of high-quality princess-themed items that would go to girls in need throughout the community. I watched the comments start rolling in within minutes. Multiple people were asking why Kara donated her niece's shower gifts, with some saying it seemed strange to give away brand new baby items. I waited about an hour and then commented myself, keeping my tone helpful and friendly. I explained that I'd actually had a nephew, not a niece, so these items couldn't be used, and I thought donation was better than letting them sit unused in my house. The comment section exploded after that. People started tagging Kara's business page, asking questions about what happened and why she'd been so certain about the gender. Some comments defended Kara, saying mistakes happen, but others pointed out that a party planner should probably listen to their clients instead of making assumptions. Kara called me within 3 hours, absolutely hysterical. I answered the phone and immediately had to hold it away from my ear because she was screaming so loud. She yelled that I'd given away thousands of dollars worth of items that she had paid for, asking how I could possibly do something so cruel and vindictive. I waited until she stopped to breathe and then spoke in the calmest voice I could manage. I reminded her that she had insisted those items were gifts for my baby, and since my baby couldn't possibly use frilly pink dresses and princess dolls, I donated them rather than let them go to waste. Kara started crying and said I should have asked her first, that she could have returned some of it or saved it for a future baby. I pointed out that she never asked me before throwing a pink princess shower or redecorating my nursery, so I figured making decisions without permission was just how our family operated now. Kara hung up on me, and I sat there feeling satisfied despite the crying baby in my arms who needed to be fed. Christian contacted me again 3 days later, his voice much different from the last time we'd talked. He sounded tired and sympathetic instead of defensive, admitting that Kara's insistence on being right about everything had actually been a problem in their business partnership for a while now. He said several clients over the past year had complained about Kara pushing her vision instead of listening to what they actually wanted. Christian asked what it would take to resolve this whole situation before they lost any more clients, because the negative attention was really starting to hurt their bookings. I appreciated his honesty, but I told him the same thing I'd been telling everyone else. Kara needed to publicly acknowledge she was wrong to override my wishes, apologize for both the financial burden and the boundary violation, pay back the money she'd cost us, and honor the bets she'd taken from family members. I explained that until all of that happened, I would keep returning the favor of public embarrassment that she'd given me at that shower. Christian sighed and said he'd talk to Kara again, but he didn't sound hopeful about getting through to her. 2 weeks postpartum hit me hard with exhaustion from the constant night feedings, but I felt strangely energized by finally standing up to Kara after years of just going along with whatever she wanted. Rob found me at 2 a.m. feeding Gwendolyn in the nursery, still scrolling through my phone and documenting another expense. He sat down next to me and said he was worried I was using too much energy on this conflict when I should be resting and recovering. I looked at him and explained that I would actually rest better once these boundaries were firmly established, because otherwise this pattern would just continue forever. Rob nodded and took Gwendolyn from me for burping, saying he understood but reminding me to take care of myself too. I promised I would, but I also knew that backing down now would teach Kara that she could do whatever she wanted without real consequences. I started calling everyone who'd attended the shower the following week, telling them I was collecting addresses, so I could send proper thank you notes for their gifts. During each call, I made sure to mention how unfortunate it was that Kara's absolute certainty had left us with nothing useful for our actual son. Most people responded with awkward sympathy, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama. But several guests expressed genuine shock that Kara still hadn't made things right, saying they'd assumed she would have paid us back or at least apologized by now. One woman said she'd been at other events Kara planned and noticed Kara always seemed to think she knew better than the actual client. Another guest mentioned she'd heard through mutual friends that Kara was refusing to pay out the bet money, which seemed really unfair since she'd been the one insisting on taking those bets in the first place. By the time I finished all 60 calls, I knew the story had spread through our entire social circle and beyond. The first email came from someone named Marlena, who said she'd used Kara's company for her wedding 2 years ago. She wrote that Kara had been pushy about the flower arrangements, insisting on pink peonies when Marlena specifically wanted white roses because they reminded her of her grandmother. Kara kept saying pink was more photogenic and would look better in the venue lighting, eventually wearing Marlena down until she agreed just to stop the arguments. Marlena said she'd always felt uncomfortable about it, but never left a review because Kara was well connected in their social circle, and she didn't want drama. But after hearing about the baby shower situation through mutual friends, she felt like maybe her experience was part of a pattern. 2 more former clients reached out over the next few days with similar stories about Kara overriding their preferences based on her certainty about what looked best, or what would photograph better, or what guests would prefer. One woman said Kara had changed her reception menu without permission because she decided the original choices were too boring, and another said Kara rearranged her entire seating chart, claiming her intuition told her certain guests wouldn't get along. I read each message carefully and responded thanking them for sharing their experiences. I mentioned that honest feedback helps everyone make informed decisions about vendors, and that reviews exist specifically, so future clients can learn from past experiences. Within 3 days, reviews started appearing on Kara's business pages, mentioning her tendency to override client wishes and push her own vision instead of listening to what people actually wanted. The reviews were factual and specific, not mean or exaggerated, just honest accounts of what these clients had experienced. Kara's average rating dropped from 4.8 stars to 3.9 stars in less than a week. Joyce showed up at my house on a Tuesday morning without calling first, banging on the door loud enough to wake Gwendolyn from his nap. I was exhausted and frustrated as I opened the door with my son fussing in my arms, and Joyce immediately started talking about how I needed to stop destroying Kara's business over a simple mistake. I adjusted Gwendolyn to get him latched for feeding and asked Joyce to please define what she meant by simple mistake, because spending $4,000 of someone else's money against their clearly stated wishes didn't sound particularly simple to me. Joyce stepped inside without being invited and started pacing my living room, saying that Kara made an error in judgment, but she didn't deserve to have her entire career ruined over it. I sat down in the rocking chair and focused on getting Gwendolyn comfortable, while Joyce kept talking about family loyalty and forgiveness, and how sisters should support each other through difficult times. I waited until she paused for breath, and then asked if she remembered me explicitly telling both her and Kara that Rob and I wanted gender-neutral colors for the nursery and baby items. Joyce's face flushed, and she admitted she did remember, but she insisted that Kara's intuition had always been right before, so it seemed safe to trust her judgment this time. I asked Joyce if she understood that being right in the past doesn't give someone permission to ignore clearly stated boundaries in the present, and she got defensive, saying she thought they were doing something nice and generous by planning the perfect shower and decorating the nursery. I looked at Joyce holding my son and asked her directly why she helped redecorate my nursery without my permission, painting over walls and assembling furniture in my home while I was deliberately kept away at the shower. Joyce's voice got higher as she explained that Kara said it would be a wonderful surprise and I'd be so grateful once I saw how beautiful everything looked. I told her that was exactly the problem with both of them, deciding what I should want and how I should feel instead of respecting what I actually said I wanted. Joyce started crying and saying I was being cruel and vindictive, that Kara was sorry even if she hadn't said it properly, and that I should be the bigger person and let this go. I asked Joyce if she would let it go if someone spent $4,000 of her dollars against her explicit instructions, and then refused to apologize or pay her back, and she didn't have an answer. I told her I needed her to leave because Gwendolyn needed to finish eating, and then go back down for his nap, and I was too tired to keep having the same conversation where she defended Kara's boundary violations instead of acknowledging the actual harm that was done. Joyce left crying and I heard her car door slam hard enough to echo down the street. Rob came home from work to find me crying in the nursery while holding Gwendolyn, surrounded by paint samples and furniture catalogs because we still couldn't afford to replace everything at once. He took our son from me gently and started the swaying motion that usually calmed Gwendolyn down, then sat next to me on the floor. Rob reminded me that I wasn't wrong to expect basic respect and accountability from family members, that what Kara and Joyce did was a serious violation of our home and our clearly stated wishes. He said that setting these boundaries now, even though it was hard and exhausting, would protect Gwendolyn in the future from their pattern of deciding they knew better than us about our own child. I leaned against Rob's shoulder and admitted I was so tired of fighting, tired of being made to feel like the bad guy for expecting people to respect basic boundaries. Rob kissed the top of my head and said he knew, but that backing down now would just teach them they could do whatever they wanted, as long as they waited for me to get too exhausted to keep fighting back. The pediatrician visit the next week went well with Gwendolyn gaining weight properly and hitting all his developmental markers. The doctor asked about my stress levels as part of the standard postpartum checkup, and I found myself explaining the whole nursery situation while trying not to cry in the exam room. She stopped writing notes and looked at me with genuine concern, saying she was appalled that my family had created this kind of financial and emotional burden during such a vulnerable time in my life. She validated that postpartum recovery was hard enough without family members adding stress through boundary violations and refusing to take accountability for the damage they caused. The doctor spent extra time talking about the importance of protecting my mental health and setting firm boundaries with people who added stress instead of support, even when those people were family members. She wrote down some resources for postpartum support groups and reminded me that asking for basic respect wasn't selfish or cruel. It was necessary for my well-being and my ability to care for my son. I took photos of Gwendolyn sleeping in the pack and play we'd set up in our bedroom because the nursery was still being repainted and we couldn't afford new furniture yet. The pictures showed my beautiful son in his temporary sleeping space with our bedroom furniture visible in the background, making it obvious this wasn't a proper nursery setup. I posted the photos on social media with a caption about making do with what we have until we can afford to properly furnish a nursery after some unexpected expenses. And I didn't tag anyone, but I knew Kara would see it because we were still connected online. Within an hour, comments started appearing from friends and extended family members offering hand-me-down boy items and asking what happened to all the gifts from the shower. Several people seemed genuinely confused about why we didn't have a proper nursery setup when they'd seen all the elaborate decorations and gifts at the shower just a few weeks ago. I responded to each comment honestly and factually, explaining that all the shower gifts had been princess-themed items for a girl, so we donated them to charity, and we're starting over with appropriate items for our son. People started asking more questions about why everything had been girl-themed when we hadn't found out the gender. And I simply said that the shower planner had been absolutely certain about the gender despite our decision not to find out, and unfortunately her certainty had been wrong. More comments appeared expressing shock that we'd been left with nothing useful after such an elaborate shower, and several people mentioned they'd assumed we must have received at least some neutral items. I confirmed that no, everything had been aggressively feminine because the planner had taken bets on being right about the gender and collected $500 from relatives who doubted her intuition. The comments section turned into people expressing outrage on our behalf and offering to help however they could with supplies, or hand-me-downs, or even money to help furnish the nursery properly. Christian posted an announcement on Kara's business page that same evening about new company policies being implemented immediately. The post explained that their planning company would now require written client approval for all major design choices regardless of planner intuition or experience, and that respecting client preferences would be the top priority moving forward. Several comments appeared within minutes mentioning that this seemed like a direct response to the baby shower situation, and Christian didn't delete them or deny the connection. One comment asked if this meant Kara had been making decisions without client approval before, and another person responded saying they'd hired Kara for an event, and definitely felt pushed toward choices they hadn't wanted. The announcement got shared multiple times with people tagging friends and warning them to get everything in writing if they hired event planners, using Kara's company as an example of why client approval policies mattered. The next afternoon, Rob's parents showed up at our door with their SUV packed full of baby items. Joseph carried in a bouncer while Rob's mother had her arms full of neatly folded clothes in blues and greens and yellows. They made 3 trips back to the car, bringing in a changing table still in its box, receiving blankets that weren't covered in princesses and practical sleepers in multiple sizes. I tried to tell them they didn't need to do this, that we could manage. But Joseph waved me off and said this was what grandparents did when family actually showed up for each other. Rob's mother unpacked the clothes and organized them by size in the dresser we'd borrowed from a neighbor, chatting about which items came from Rob when he was a baby and which ones she'd picked up at a consignment sale. She refused to let me pay them back, saying she'd rather spend money on things her grandson could actually use than watch us struggle because my sister had made such a mess of things. The contrast hit me hard as I watched them work together to assemble the changing table, checking the instructions and handing each other tools without any drama or guilt trips. My own mother had helped Kara paint my nursery pink without asking permission, but Rob's parents showed up with exactly what we needed and acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. I sat in the rocking chair feeding Gwendolyn and realized I'd spent years making excuses for how Kara and Joyce treated me because confronting their behavior felt harder than just going along with whatever they wanted. It was easier to let Kara take over my baby shower than argue about color schemes. It was simpler to pretend I liked the pink nursery than tell my mother she'd overstepped. I'd trained them to ignore my boundaries by never enforcing any consequences when they crossed lines. Layla stopped by that evening after Rob's parents left, bringing dinner and her usual direct approach to problems. She looked around at the new items and asked what the plan was for getting Kara to pay for all this. I showed her my spreadsheet with every expense documented, and she suggested I should send Kara an actual invoice with payment terms and late fees, treating this like the business transaction it was. If Kara wanted to act like a professional party planner, she could deal with professional consequences for ignoring client preferences. Layla knew Conrad from law school and texted him right there, asking if he'd help draft an invoice that would hold up if I needed to take Kara to small claims court. Conrad called back within 20 minutes saying he'd be happy to help and that what Kara did was absolutely grounds for a lawsuit. He asked me to send him all my documentation and said he'd have something official ready by the end of the week. I felt a weird mix of relief and nervousness as I forwarded him the spreadsheet, knowing this was going to make things even worse with my family, but also knowing I couldn't back down now. The official invoice arrived at Kara's business address the following Friday via certified mail. Conrad had made it look completely professional with legal language demanding $4,200 within 30 days, or I would file in small claims court. The certified mail tracking showed Christian had signed for it on Monday morning, and I got a confirmation email that it had been delivered to the correct business address. I waited for the explosion, checking my phone constantly, but the first response came through social media instead of a direct call. Kara posted a long rant about family loyalty and forgiveness, never mentioning my name or any specifics, but clearly directed at me based on the timing. She wrote about how family was supposed to support each other through mistakes, not punish each other over honest errors, and how some people cared more about money than relationships. Multiple people commented asking for context, and several mentioned they'd heard about the baby shower situation through mutual friends and wanted to know if this was related. Kara didn't respond to any of the questions, just kept posting vague statements about betrayal and how she'd always been there for certain family members who were now throwing her under the bus. I didn't respond to Kara's posts directly, but when I saw Verity had made her own post asking about the bet money, I commented confirming that Kara still hadn't paid the $500 to the winners. Verity responded saying she was considering small claims court as well, since Kara had taken money under false pretenses and was now refusing to honor the bets she'd initiated. 2 other people who'd won bets commented on Verity's post saying they were interested in joining a group claim, and suddenly Kara was facing potential legal action from multiple people, not just me. The comments section turned into a discussion about whether Kara's business practices were generally questionable, with one person mentioning she'd felt pressured into expensive upgrades she hadn't wanted at her wedding last year. Joyce called Rob directly Tuesday afternoon, catching him at work. He put her on speaker in his car and she spent 10 minutes trying to get him to convince me to drop this before it destroyed the family. Rob let her talk herself out, then told her calmly that the family was damaged when she and Kara violated our boundaries and spent our money without permission, not when I started demanding accountability for it. Joyce tried arguing that Kara had meant well and made an honest mistake, but Rob pointed out that ignoring someone's clearly stated wishes wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. He said we'd told Kara multiple times we didn't want to know the gender and wanted neutral colors, and she'd chosen to ignore us because she valued being right more than respecting our decisions. Joyce got quiet after that, then said she needed to go and hung up without saying goodbye. 3 weeks postpartum, I was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep total each night, but I felt stronger about my decision to hold firm on consequences. The nursery was finally repainted in soft gray with white trim, and we were slowly filling it with appropriate furniture and supplies between Gwendolyn's feeding schedule. Every time I walked into that room and saw the neutral walls instead of pink princess murals, I felt like I could breathe properly. Rob had taken time off work to help with the painting, and we'd spent 2 full days covering up every trace of the ballet slipper pink. The mural had required 3 coats of primer before the gray would stick properly, and I'd documented every hour of labor and every supply cost for Conrad's records. Christian called me directly on Thursday, his voice careful and professional. He said Kara had agreed to pay $1,500 immediately if I would drop the rest of the invoice and stop the public campaign about the situation. I told him that wasn't how this worked, that Kara didn't get to negotiate down the consequences of her actions like this was some kind of business deal where we met in the middle. Christian sighed and said he was trying to find a solution that worked for everyone, but I cut him off and explained that the solution was simple. Kara needed to pay the full amount she cost us, just like any client would expect a vendor to fix their mistakes. If she'd messed up a wedding this badly, she'd be facing a lawsuit for the full amount of damages, not offering to pay a third of it and calling it even. I told Christian that Kara had multiple opportunities to respect our wishes. When we said no to finding out the gender, she could have respected that. When we asked for neutral colors, she could have listened. When the invitations went out completely pink, she could have fixed it. During the shower itself, when Rob kept reminding people we didn't actually know the gender, she could have acknowledged she might be wrong. She chose certainty over respect every single time, doubling down and taking bets and convincing my mother to redecorate our nursery, and now she had to pay the full price for those choices. Christian was quiet for a long moment, then said he'd relay my response to Kara and suggested she might want to consider setting up a payment plan, since the full amount was clearly more than she had available right now. I told him that would be fine as long as it was in writing and included interest, and that Conrad could help draft something official if Kara was actually serious about paying, instead of just trying to make this go away cheaply. I told Christian that Kara had multiple opportunities to respect our wishes. When we said no to finding out the gender, she could have respected that. When we asked for neutral colors, she could have listened. When the invitations went out completely pink, she could have fixed it. During the shower itself, when Rob kept reminding people we didn't actually know the gender, she could have acknowledged she might be wrong. She chose certainty over respect every single time, doubling down and taking bets and convincing my mother to redecorate our nursery, and now she had to pay the full price for those choices. Christian was quiet for a long moment, then said he'd relay my response to Kara and suggested she might want to consider setting up a payment plan, since the full amount was clearly more than she had available right now. I told him that would be fine as long as it was in writing and included interest, and that Conrad could help draft something official if Kara was actually serious about paying, instead of just trying to make this go away cheaply. 2 days later, Verity called me sounding mad as hell. She'd sent Kara 3 messages asking about the bet money and gotten nothing but excuses back. Verity said she was done waiting and had filed paperwork in small claims court for her $200 plus filing fees. Within hours, 2 other people who'd bet against Kara joined the claim, and suddenly my sister was facing legal action from 3 different people. The court date got set for 6 weeks out, which meant Kara now had official legal consequences coming from multiple directions, not just from me. I felt something settle in my chest knowing other people were holding her accountable too. Joyce called me that evening, her voice tight and controlled in that way that meant she was furious but trying not to show it. She said she was organizing a family dinner for Sunday so we could all sit down and work this out like adults before things got more out of hand. I asked her what exactly needed working out, since the solution was simple and Kara just refused to do it. Joyce said families compromise and forgive, and I needed to be willing to meet Kara halfway instead of pushing for everything I wanted. I told Joyce I wasn't interested in being pressured to accept less than what I was owed, especially not at some dinner where everyone would gang up on me to protect Kara from consequences. Joyce started crying, saying I was tearing the family apart over money and pride. I reminded her that I'd asked for neutral colors and she'd helped paint my nursery pink anyway, so her opinion on respecting boundaries didn't carry much weight with me right now. She hung up on me. Rob's parents called an hour later asking if we'd like to come to their house for dinner on Sunday instead. Joseph said they'd been planning to have us over anyway, and figured we might need somewhere to be that wasn't full of people making excuses for bad behavior. The contrast hit me hard. My family wanted me to show up and get pressured into accepting less. Rob's family wanted to feed us and support us without conditions. We went to Joseph and Rob's mother's house on Sunday with Gwendolyn, who was starting to sleep in slightly longer stretches at night. Their home was warm and comfortable, filled with photos of Rob and his brother growing up. Rob's mother had made pot roast and potatoes, and she'd set up a little area in the living room with a soft blanket where Gwendolyn could lie on his back and look around. Nobody mentioned Kara or Joyce or the court case. They just asked how we were doing, how the baby was sleeping, if we needed anything for the house. Joseph told stories about when Rob was a newborn, and how they'd had no idea what they were doing half the time. Rob's mother showed me the baby book she'd kept with all of Rob's firsts, and said she'd be happy to help me start one for Gwendolyn if I wanted. The whole evening felt safe and supportive in a way family dinners at my mother's house never had. I realized I'd spent my whole life managing Kara's feelings and Joyce's expectations, and I'd thought that was just what family meant. But Rob's parents showed me it could mean something completely different. People could just show up and be helpful without needing credit or control. The nursery was finally starting to look like an actual room for a baby boy, instead of a princess nightmare. Rob's parents had bought us a gray and white crib that matched the freshly painted walls. Layla had found a mobile with little woodland animals that hung above the changing table. Friends from work had sent gift cards that we used for practical things like bottles and burp cloths, and a dozen white onesies in different sizes. I'd purchased a soft rug with blue and green geometric patterns that tied everything together without being aggressively gendered. The relief of walking into that room and seeing a space that actually worked for my son was huge. I took photos of Gwendolyn lying in his crib, looking tiny against the white sheets, and posted them with a caption about how good it felt to finally have his room ready. Several people commented asking about the shower gifts, and I responded honestly that we'd donated them since they weren't appropriate for our baby. I didn't tag Kara or mention her by name, but anyone who knew the story understood exactly what I meant. Thursday afternoon, I was in my pajamas feeding Gwendolyn on the couch when someone knocked on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw Kara standing on my doorstep, her face red and puffy like she'd been crying. She knocked again, harder this time, and called my name through the door. I shifted Gwendolyn to my other arm and walked close enough to the door that she could hear me clearly. I told her that all communication needed to go through Conrad now and she needed to leave my property. Kara started crying harder, her voice breaking as she said she just needed to talk to me for 5 minutes. I told her no, she'd had weeks to talk and chose to laugh at my invoice and refused to take responsibility, so now we were doing this officially. She pressed her hands against the door, saying please, begging me to just let her explain. I stood there holding my son, listening to my sister cry on my doorstep, and felt absolutely nothing except determination to maintain this boundary. She kept crying, her voice getting louder and more desperate. She said I was being cruel and mean and hurting her over money when family should matter more than any of this. She said she'd made a mistake and I was punishing her forever, making her lose her business and her reputation over one wrong prediction. She said Joyce was right that I'd changed since having the baby, that I'd become cold and focused on money instead of on the people who loved me. I opened the door just wide enough that she could see my face but couldn't push her way inside. I told her I'd explicitly stated our wishes multiple times, and she chose to ignore family in favor of being right. She chose her ego over my comfort at every single turn, and now she was mad that I wouldn't let her get away with it. Kara wiped her eyes, looking at me like she didn't recognize me. She asked when I'd become this person who cared more about revenge than relationships. I told her I cared about respect, which she'd never shown me. I said if family actually mattered to her, she would have respected our decision about gender reveals and color schemes. If family mattered, she wouldn't have taken bets on my baby's gender for profit. If family mattered, she would have apologized and made it right weeks ago instead of playing victim now that she was facing consequences. Kara's face crumpled and she sank down onto my front steps, sobbing into her hands. She said she'd been so sure she was right that she didn't even consider she could be wrong. She said her feelings had never failed before, and she'd thought she was giving me the perfect shower, making everything special and beautiful for my daughter. She said she was so embarrassed and ashamed that she'd been wrong in front of 60 people, that everyone was talking about how her gift had finally failed, that she'd lost bets and clients and her reputation over being wrong about one thing. I looked down at her crying on my steps and felt that small crack in my anger. Not enough to back down, but enough to recognize that she was actually admitting something real. I told her the problem wasn't that she was wrong about the gender. Lots of people guess wrong about that stuff. The problem was that she put her need to be right ahead of my clearly stated wishes. She made my baby shower about proving her intuition instead of celebrating my baby. She spent $4,000 of stuff I couldn't use because she refused to consider that maybe she didn't know better than me about my own life. Kara looked up at me with mascara running down her face. She asked what it would take to fix this, her voice small and broken. I repeated exactly what I'd said all along. Public apology acknowledging the boundary violation. Full payment of the $4,200. Honoring the bets she took from people who believed her. Those were the terms, same as they'd always been. She said she couldn't afford to pay it all at once. Her business was struggling because of the bad publicity. I told her we could set up a payment plan through Conrad if she was actually serious about making this right instead of just trying to get me to drop it. She nodded slowly, wiping her nose on her sleeve. She asked if I'd really accept a payment plan, or if this was just another way to punish her. I told her Conrad would draft something fair and official, and if she stuck to it, we'd be done. She stood up, looking exhausted and defeated. She said she'd call Conrad tomorrow to work it out. I told her that was a good start and closed the door. Conrad drafted a formal agreement over the next 2 days. Kara would pay $700 monthly for 6 months, which covered the $4,200 plus a small amount of interest. She'd post a public apology on her business page acknowledging that she'd overridden client wishes and explaining the new policies Christian had implemented to prevent it from happening again. She'd pay out the bet money immediately to Verity and the others, which would hopefully get them to drop the small claims case. Christian came to my house to witness the signing, looking relieved that this whole nightmare might finally be ending. Kara signed the papers without looking at me, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name. Christian signed as witness, then handed me my copy. He thanked me for being willing to work out a payment plan instead of pushing for everything at once through the courts. I told him I just wanted Kara to take responsibility and make it right, and this agreement did that. After they left, I sat on the couch holding Gwendolyn and looked at the signed papers. It wasn't over yet, but it was moving toward resolution. Kara would pay what she owed. She'd apologize publicly. She'd face the consequences of putting her ego ahead of my boundaries. And maybe, eventually, we'd figure out what kind of relationship we could have after all this. But that was future stuff. Right now, I had a payment plan, a properly decorated nursery, and a son who needed his afternoon feeding. That felt like enough. That evening, I checked my phone obsessively while feeding Gwendolyn, waiting to see if Kara would actually follow through. Around 8 o'clock, the notification popped up on my screen. Kara had posted on her business page and my stomach twisted as I opened it. The post was longer than I expected, written in a completely different tone than her usual promotional content. She admitted she'd let her ego override a client's clearly stated preferences, explained that she'd been so confident in her intuition that she'd ignored repeated requests for neutral colors and acknowledged the financial and emotional burden this had caused during what should have been a joyful time. She outlined new policies Christian had implemented requiring written client approval for all major design choices regardless of planner intuition or experience. The comments started appearing within minutes. Several former clients wrote that they appreciated her accountability and honesty. Marlena commented that this level of transparency made her reconsider her negative review. A few people who'd attended the shower posted supportive messages about learning from mistakes. I sat there staring at my phone, surprised by how genuine it sounded. This wasn't the defensive, victim-playing Kara I'd been dealing with for weeks. This was actual acknowledgement of what she'd done wrong. The certified check arrived in my mailbox 3 days later, crisp and official-looking with $700 made out in my name. I photographed it before depositing it through my banking app, saving the image as proof that the payment plan was actually happening. That same afternoon, Verity texted me a screenshot of her bank account showing a deposit from Kara with a memo line reading, "Bet winnings." She added 3 exclamation points, and a thank you message, saying she'd been ready to file in small claims court, but Kara had paid everyone who won the bets. The relief felt physical, like something heavy lifting off my chest. This was real progress, actual consequences being followed through instead of empty promises and excuses. My phone rang that evening while Rob was giving Gwendolyn a bottle. Joyce's name appeared on the screen and I almost didn't answer. Rob saw my hesitation and nodded toward the phone, silently telling me to take it if I needed to. I answered and immediately heard crying on the other end. Joyce's voice came through choked and shaky, asking how I could humiliate Kara, so publicly when she was my sister. She said the whole family was talking about the business page post, that Kara was embarrassed and hurt, that I'd taken things too far. I let her talk without interrupting, waiting for her to run out of steam. When she finally paused for breath, I reminded her calmly that Kara had humiliated herself by refusing to respect boundaries and take accountability until she was legally forced to do it. Joyce started to argue, but I cut her off. I pointed out that Kara had 60 guests witness her certainty about my baby's gender, took bets for profit, and then refused to admit she was wrong or make it right for weeks. The public apology matched the public humiliation she'd put me through. Joyce switched tactics, trying guilt instead of anger. She brought up family loyalty, sisterly bonds, the importance of forgiveness. I felt my jaw tighten as I listened to the same enabling patterns that had let Kara steamroll over people her entire life. When Joyce paused again, I asked her a direct question. Why was she more concerned about Kara's humiliation than about the financial and emotional burden she and Kara had placed on me during the vulnerable postpartum period? Silence stretched across the line. I could hear Joyce breathing, but she didn't answer. I pressed further, asking why my discomfort at that shower didn't matter, why the $4,000 in useless items didn't matter, why my explicitly stated wishes about gender-neutral colors didn't matter. Still nothing. Joyce made a small sound like she was about to speak, then stopped. I told her I needed space from her enabling behavior while I focused on my son. She started crying harder, but I ended the call before she could launch into another guilt trip. Rob looked at me from across the room, Gwendolyn sleeping against his shoulder, and gave me a proud nod. That night, after putting Gwendolyn down in his bassinet, Rob and I talked about how to handle future family events. We sat on the couch in the dim light from the hallway, speaking quietly so we wouldn't wake the baby. Rob said he was worried about holiday gatherings, birthday parties, any situation where my family would have access to us and might try to pressure me about Kara or push boundaries with Gwendolyn. I agreed completely. We decided we'd attend family events when we felt ready, but we'd leave immediately if anyone tried to guilt me about the situation or attempted to boundary stomp with our son. Rob suggested we should have a code word, something I could say that would signal him to grab Gwendolyn and head for the car. I picked actually because I'd been saying it a lot lately when correcting people's assumptions. He squeezed my hand and said we were united in protecting our nuclear family, even if it meant distance from my extended family. The conversation felt important, like we were drawing a line around what mattered most and agreeing to defend it together. Joseph called me a few days later while I was doing laundry, his voice warm and a little emotional. He said he was proud of me for standing up to the dysfunction in my family, that it took real strength to set boundaries with people you loved when they refused to respect you. I felt tears prick my eyes as he talked, surprised by how much his validation meant. He went on to say that watching me handle this situation had inspired him to address some enabling patterns in his own extended family, things he'd let slide for years because confrontation felt harder than accommodation. We talked for almost 30 minutes about family dynamics, generational patterns, the exhausting work of being the one who finally says enough. When we hung up, I sat on the floor next to the laundry basket and cried, not from sadness but from relief that someone in a parental role understood what I'd been dealing with. 3 months postpartum arrived faster than I expected. Life was settling into a rhythm with Gwendolyn, the chaos of newborn survival mode giving way to something more predictable. The monthly payment from Kara arrived on time via certified check, just like the first one. I deposited it without calling or texting her, keeping our interaction purely financial. We didn't talk beyond the transaction, no attempts at reconciliation or casual conversation. I was surprised by how peaceful it felt to have distance from her constant need for attention and validation. The space between us wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was quiet in a way our relationship had never been before. I wasn't managing her feelings or accommodating her ego or walking on eggshells around her intuition. I was just living my life with my son, and she was paying what she owed. Joyce made occasional attempts to guilt me into family gatherings, calling every few weeks with invitations to dinners or suggesting we all needed to work on healing the family rift. I maintained my boundary that I'd attend when I was ready, and not before, refusing to be pressured into premature reconciliation just to make everyone else comfortable. Rob's parents continued to be incredibly supportive, showing up with meals and offering to watch Gwendolyn when I needed to sleep or shower. They never asked about the situation with Kara unless I brought it up first, never tried to mediate or push forgiveness. Gwendolyn was surrounded by love even if my side of the family was distant, held and played with and celebrated by people who actually respected our boundaries and showed up with real support instead of boundary violations disguised as gifts. Layla came over one afternoon when Gwendolyn was napping, bringing coffee and sitting with me in the living room. She looked at me carefully, studying my face, then said I seemed lighter and less anxious now that I wasn't constantly managing Kara's ego and Joyce's enabling. I thought about it for a minute, realizing she was right. The tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders for years had loosened. I wasn't bracing for the next boundary violation or scrambling to smooth over Kara's latest drama. I'd spent years exhausting myself trying to keep peace, accommodating unreasonable demands and swallowing my own needs to avoid conflict. Choosing my own peace instead felt revolutionary, like I'd discovered I was allowed to prioritize my own comfort and my son's well-being over my sister's ego. Layla smiled and said it showed that I looked more like myself than I had in a long time. The nursery was fully furnished now with everything Gwendolyn needed, purchased with money we budgeted carefully, and gifts from people who actually respected our preferences. The walls were soft gray with white trim. The furniture was simple and functional. The decorations were minimal and age-appropriate. Every time I walked in to change a diaper or put Gwendolyn down for a nap, I felt proud instead of violated. The room reflected our choices, our taste, our values. It wasn't contaminated by someone else's assumptions or ego. That shift was worth every uncomfortable confrontation, every difficult conversation, every moment of standing firm when it would have been easier to give in. I'd protected my space and my son's space, and the result was a room that felt peaceful and right. Month 6 arrived with spring weather and Gwendolyn reaching new milestones. The final payment from Kara showed up in my mailbox on schedule, the last certified check completing the $4,200 debt. I called Conrad to confirm the debt was satisfied, and he congratulated me on seeing it through. I felt relief, but not reconciliation, closure on the financial obligation, but not the relationship damage. The relationship with my sister was fundamentally changed, possibly permanently, and I was okay with that because it had been built on my constant accommodation rather than mutual respect. We'd never had the equal partnership I thought we did. I'd been shrinking myself to make room for her ego, and she'd been comfortable with that arrangement. Now that I'd stopped accommodating, there wasn't much relationship left, and maybe that was honest in a way we'd never been before. Joyce called 2 days after the final check cleared, her voice careful and hopeful when she asked if we could try a family dinner now that everything was settled. I agreed to meet at a neutral restaurant, keeping the visit short and manageable, and Rob squeezed my hand when I hung up. The dinner happened on a Saturday evening at a chain restaurant halfway between our houses. the kind of place with loud music and busy servers that made awkward silences less obvious. Kara arrived first and sat staring at her menu like it contained fascinating secrets, barely glancing up when Rob and I walked in with Gwendolyn in his carrier. Joyce talked too much and too fast, filling every quiet moment with cheerful commentary about the weather and the menu and how big Gwendolyn was getting. I answered her questions politely, but didn't volunteer extra information, watching Kara push food around her plate without eating much. She made eye contact exactly twice during the meal, both times looking away quickly like she'd touched something hot. Joyce kept trying to create moments of connection, asking if I remembered family trips or inside jokes. But those memories felt contaminated now by the understanding that I'd always been accommodating Kara's needs instead of having my own met. The meal ended after 45 minutes with promises to do it again soon that none of us really meant, and Rob carried Gwendolyn to the car while I stood in the parking lot feeling relieved it was over. Driving home, I realized something that had been building quietly for months. I didn't miss the closeness I thought Kara and I had because it was never real closeness in the first place. Real closeness required two people showing up equally, respecting boundaries, considering each other's needs and feelings. What we'd had was me making myself smaller, so Kara could take up more space, me swallowing discomfort so she could stay comfortable, me managing her ego because she refused to manage it herself. I'd called it sisterhood and best friendship, but it was actually just me doing all the emotional work while she took everything I offered and demanded more. The loss I felt wasn't about losing Kara. It was about losing the fantasy that we'd ever had the equal partnership I wanted us to have. That realization hurt, but it also freed me from trying to rebuild something that had never existed correctly in the first place. Rob reached over and took my hand while he drove, not saying anything because he understood I was processing something important. When we got home, I fed Gwendolyn and put him down for the night, then sat in the nursery looking at the gray walls and simple furniture we'd chosen together. This room represented what real support looked like, purchased with money we'd saved and gifts from people who actually asked what we wanted instead of assuming they knew better. The following weekend, we celebrated Gwendolyn's 6-month milestone with a small gathering at our house. Joseph and Rob's mother arrived first with a photo album they'd been putting together of Gwendolyn's first months, full of pictures from visits and video calls. Layla showed up with homemade cupcakes and a card that made me cry with its message about watching me become the mother I wanted to be. We sat in the living room passing Gwendolyn around, everyone taking turns making him laugh with silly faces and songs. Joseph told stories about Rob as a baby that made everyone laugh, and Rob's mother showed me the blanket she'd knitted in soft blue and gray stripes. Nobody mentioned Kara or Joyce or the Pink Princess disaster, not because it was forbidden, but because it simply wasn't relevant to this celebration of people who'd shown up with actual respect and support. I watched these people who'd become Gwendolyn's family, not through blood obligation, but through consistent care and boundary respect, and understood this was what healthy family dynamics looked like. They asked before helping, respected our parenting choices even when they disagreed, showed up when we needed them, and gave space when we asked for it. I was learning what it meant to be part of a family system that didn't require anyone to shrink themselves, and it was teaching me what I wanted to model for Gwendolyn as he grew up. Life moved forward with new rhythms and clear boundaries that felt sustainable rather than exhausting. I stayed cordial with Kara and Joyce, responding to texts and attending occasional family events, but I no longer accommodated their dysfunction at my own expense, or let guilt manipulate me into situations that violated my comfort. Kara and I had a polite but distant relationship now, more like acquaintances than sisters, and I was genuinely okay with that because the alternative was returning to patterns that had never served me. Joyce still tried sometimes to guilt me into more closeness, but I'd learned to recognize manipulation and respond with firm boundaries instead of accommodation. My son had a beautiful nursery filled with things Rob and I chose together, every item reflecting our values and preferences instead of someone else's assumptions about who we should be. The gray walls and simple furniture represented something more important than decoration. They represented our right to make decisions about our own family without interference or override. I'd learned that protecting your family sometimes meant disappointing people who'd never respected your boundaries anyway, and that lesson was worth every uncomfortable confrontation and damaged relationship. I was genuinely happy with the mother I was becoming, someone who prioritized her child's needs and her own well-being over maintaining false peace with people who taught me my comfort mattered less than their egos. Rob and I were building a family based on mutual respect and clear communication, and Gwendolyn would grow up understanding that healthy relationships required both people to show up equally. That mattered more than anything else, more than my mother's approval or my sister's forgiveness, more than maintaining family harmony that had always required my silence. I looked at my son sleeping peacefully in his properly decorated nursery and felt proud of the choices I'd made to protect him and teach him that boundaries weren't negotiable and respect wasn't optional.